Hello everyone. My presentation about assessment and the evolution of young learners, prepared by Aichanova Aray. Plan. First one, proposes and the principles of assessment and evolution. Second, formal and informal assessment. What is assessment? Assessment is a process by which information is obtained relative to some known objective or goal. Assessment is a broad term that includes testing. A test is a special form of assessment. Tests are assessments made under controlled circumstances, especially so that they may be administered. What is assessment? Assessment is more than grades. Assessment is a mechanism for providing instructors with data for improving their teaching methods and uh, for guiding and motivating students to be actively involved in their own learning. Assessment is feedback for both instructors and the students. Assessment gives feedback to both teachers and the students, not only at the end of the course but also throughout the course. It should also assist our students in diagnosing their own learning. Such feedback can positively influence what our students learn because assessment drives student learning. Assessment drives student learning. The assessment method that we use on our students will give them the idea of what is important to learn the subjects. If we use assessment methods that are only factual and knowledge-based, we might be promoting superficial learning. In order to avoid this, we need to set our course goals. These goals are the primary reason why we do assessments. What is meant by assessment? Assessment is carried out to see what children and young people know, understand, and are able to. Assessments very important for tracking progress, planning next steps, reporting, and involving parents, children, and young people in learning. Assessment covers the ways teachers support and assess children learning and monitor progress and identify identify next steps in learning. Reporting to parents, carers in writing and in discussions to help them understand their child's progress and what they can to do help their child's learning. Formal recognition for a child of young person's achievements through profiles and qualifications. Recognizing our children's achievements through a range of new qualifications in the senior school, which build in everything they have accomplished throughout their schooling. Basic principles of assessment: washback effect, reliability, authenticity, objectivity, practicality. Principles of assessment. First one, assessment will be wild. Assessment will be especially designed to measure students' achievement of the intended learning outcomes, and all intended learning outcomes will be summatively assessed. The process for the approval of new models and the programs and for amending existing models and the programs will ensure that assessment is an integral part of model of program decision, and the ongoing validity of assessment will be considered through annual and periodic review. This consideration is supported throughout by the extra subjects specialists by external examiners in relation to module approval, model amendments, program amendments, and the annual review, and by external subjects specialists other than external examiners in program approval and the periodic review. Second, assessment will be reliable. To ensure the level of consistency that it is necessary for assessment to be reliable, all awards at the same academic level will be aligned with the university generic qualification descriptor, level descriptor, and assessment criteria for that level of award. Additionally, all awards will be made in accordance with the relevant core regulations has been approved by AEC. There will be clear and consistent policies and procedures for the marking of assessed work and for the quality assurance of the assessment process. This process will be supported by the university's external examiner system, with all external examiners being asked to report on the reliability of assessment. Third, assessment will be equitable. The university regulations that different assessment methods may be appropriate for different learning styles, and it therefore encourages all programs to employ a diversity of assessment methods to allow all students to demonstrate their knowledge, understanding, and the skills. The university is also aware of the needs to make individual assessment arrangements for students with disabilities and other special requirements, and will ensure that appropriate processes are in place to consider and address such needs. 4. Assessment will be exclusive and transparent. Prior to undertaking any assessment task, students will be clearly informed of the purpose and the requirements of the task, and will be provided with the specific assessment criteria that will be used for making it. Feedback students will be related to the stated learning outcomes and the specific assessment criteria. Clear information on the policy and the process relating to assessment will be easily available to all involved in the assessment process. 5. Assessment will support the student's learning process. All assessment tasks influence the way in which students approach their learning, and this will be taken into account in the decision of assessment tasks. In every module, all students will receive timely feedback on assessed work that is aligned with the outcomes being assessed and the criteria against which these outcomes are assessed, and therefore allows them to identify how they can improve their performance. Students will receive written feedback on all summatively assessed work apart from examinations. What is the purpose of classroom assessment? Assessment for learning. How can we use assessment information to help students learn more? Assessment of learning. How much have students learned at particular point in time? The primary purpose of classroom assessment should be to better understand what students are learning and to inform the teacher about what instruction needs to occur to help students meet learning goals. Formative assessments improve learning through feedback. Summative assessments evaluate learning through grades. Assessment for learners. Assessment for learning enables teachers to use information about students' knowledge, understanding, and skills to inform their teaching. Teachers provide feedback to students about their learning and how to improve. Assessment as learning involves students in the learning process where they monitor their own progress, ask questions, and practice skills. Students use self-assessment and the teacher feedback to reflect on their learning, consolidate their understanding, and work towards learning goals. Assists teachers to use evidence of students' learning to assess student achievements against learning goals and standards. The introduction. We all know the importance of assessment is the classroom, but what is considered formal and informal assessment? In this post, I will define both types of assessment to help you determine which type best fits your needs. Most teachers are comfortable using formal assessments in the classroom. The curriculum requires certain formal assessments as specific points in the teaching year, and the guidance is provided on these requirements. When it comes to informal assessment, this is mainly left up to the teacher's initiative. There are two general categories of assessments, formal and informal. Formal assessments have dates which support the conclusions made from the test. We usually refer to these types of tests as standardized measures. These tests have been treated before on students and have statistics which support the conclusion, such as the student is reading below average for his age. The date is mathematically computed and summarized. Scores such as percentiles, steadiness, or standard scores and mostly commonly given from this type of assessment. Informal assessments are not date-driven, but rather content and performance-driven. For example, running records are informal assessments because they indicate how well a student is reading a specific book. Scores such as 10 correct out of 15% of words read correctly, and the most rubric scores are given from this type of assessment. The assessment used needs to match the purpose of assessing. Formal or standardized measures should be used to assess overall achievement, to compare a student's performance within others at their age or grade, or to identify comparable strengths and weaknesses with peers. Formal and informal assessment. Formal assessments compare individuals and groups with established norms, usually short answers or multiple choice items, can be easily scored and may predict uncertainty. Informal assessment compare individuals with themselves or small groups within a class, can be students' work samples and student interactions in a classroom setting, occur in the classroom and do not produce anxiety.
In general terms, according to Musavi 2009, assessment is appraising or estimating level or magnitude of some attribute of a person. However, in the educational practice, the term assessment refers to an ongoing process that encompasses a wide variety of methodological techniques and tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic performance, learning progress, skill acquisition, or educational needs of students. In this sense, Brown, 2011, says that whenever a student responds to a question, offers a comment, or tries out a new word or structure, the teacher subconsciously makes an appraisal of the student's performance. We can talk about two types of assessment: informal assessment and formal assessment. Informal assessment are those spontaneous forms of assessment that can easily be incorporated in the day-to-day classroom activities and that measure the student's performance and progress. Informal assessment is embedded in classroom tasks designed to elicit performance without recording results and making fixed conclusions about the student's competence. Informal assessment is usually non-judgmental in that teachers are not making ultimate decisions about the student's performance, they are simply trying to be a good coach. Examples of informal assessment can be comments on papers, responding to a draft of an essay, offering advice about how to better pronounce a word, or maybe other improvised feedback to the students. On the other hand, formal assessments are the systematic, pre-planned, data-based ways of measuring what and how well the students have learned. Formal assessments determine the student's proficiency or mastery of the content, and in this case of the language. They are systematic, planned sampling techniques constructed to give teacher and student an appraisal of student achievement. However, we can say that the formal assessment is not the same of a test. We can say that all tests are formal assessments, but not all formal assessment is testing. For example, you might use a student's journal or portfolio of materials as a formal assessment of the attainment of certain course objectives, but it is problematic to call those procedures tests. A systematic set of observations of a student's frequency of oral participation in class is certainly a formal assessment, but it is too hardly what anyone could call a test. In this sense, we can say that quizzes, final exams, portfolios, oral presentations, essays, reports are examples of formal assessment. Now we are going to see some differences between formal and informal assessment. Informal assessment is flexible and dynamic. It is not pre-planned and can take the form of different improvised activities. On the other hand, formal assessment is structured, pre-planned, and static. Informal assessment is usually individualized regarding the student's individual learning progress, whereas formal assessment is standardized. In other words, it compares the progress of the students with other students. Informal assessment is a continuous practice within the classroom, whereas formal assessment is episodic. It is usually used at the end of a term or a course of instruction. Bearing in mind the above, informal assessment is process-based, since the most important on it is how the progress of the student is achieved, whereas formal assessment is product-based, since the most important is the knowledge and competences a student can demonstrate at the end of the course. Whereas informal assessment is formative according to Brown 2011, since it consists of evaluating students in the process of forming their competences and skills with the goal of helping them to continue that growth process. Formal assessment is summative, since it aims to measure or summarize what the student has grasped and typically occurs at the end of a course or unit of instruction. Finally, whereas informal assessment is a qualitative process in which the most important is the progress of the students, formal assessment is quantitative, since the most important for it is to assign grades to the pre-planned activities that the students have to develop in the classroom. In conclusion, we can neither say that formal assessment is better than informal assessment, nor informal assessment is better than formal assessment. Both types of assessment are essential and need to be used within the classroom, since one complements the other in depicting accurate pictures of our students' learning goals, competences, and progress. We can use each type depending on the intended purpose in order to improve teaching and learning practices.
Formal assessment examples. First one, aptitude tests are used to assess a student's cognitive abilities. Second, grades are used to assess a student's progress. Third, tests are used to assess whether the student has understood content taught. Four, standardized tests are highly predictable and are reliable and can be used for students' placement. 5, essays and projects can be used to assess students' understanding of topics. Informal assessment examples. First, students summarize essential aspects of a chunk of instruction or reading in 12 words or less. Second, class vote presents several possible answers to a question and allows students to vote. Third, tickets to enter and exit, with students answering a question set by the teacher. 4, concept mapping of a topic or concept covered in the lesson. 5, flashcards are made by students with the fundamental concept or idea explained. Formal and informal assessment. Informal assessment involves observing the learners as they learned and evaluating them from the data gathered. It can be compared to formal assessment, which involves evaluation and a learner's level of language in a formal way, such as through an exam or structured continuous assessment. Formal assessment uses formal tests or structured continuous assessment to evaluate a learner's level of language. It can be compared to informal assessment, which involves observing the learner's performance as they learn and evaluating them from the data gathered.
Formal assessments versus informal assessments. What is the difference between these two types of assessments? Formal assessments are developed by a group of educators and meant for a variety of different students. They are often developed on a state or national level. Informal assessments are intended for the purpose of small sample size. They are developed by the individual teacher. Formal assessments are very data-driven, and the scores themselves become data. These tests are supported by data. There is not much data, on the other hand, associated with informal assessments. Informal assessments are unsupported by data. Formal assessment scores are usually used to compare students against other students of similar demographics. These tests are usually norm-referenced. On the other hand, informal assessment scores are compared to mastery of content material. Informal assessments are criterion referenced. Your formal assessments are always subject to specific test administration rules and training. They have very strict testing procedures. Informal assessments are not really taken as seriously as formal assessments. Those assessments simply follow normal classroom rules. Lastly, formal assessments are mostly tied to tests that benchmark student growth over time. It measures longitudinal achievement for students. Informal assessments may be given any day or any time. They measure shorter achievement periods. Right now, I just want to say thank you for your time.
Educational evolution is the evolution process of characterizing and appraising some aspects of an educational process. There are two common purposes in educational evolution which are at times in conflict with one another. Educational institutions usually require evolution data to demonstrate effectiveness to funders and other stakeholders and to provide a measure of performance for marketing purposes. Educational evolution is also a professional activity that individual educators needed to undertake if they intend to continuously review and enhance the learning they are endeavoring to faculty. Principles of evolution. Evolution is a systematic process of determining to what extent instructional objectives has been achieved. Therefore, evolution process must be carried out with effective techniques. The following principles will help to make the evolution process an effective one. First, it must be clearly stated what it is to evaluate. A teacher must be clear about the purpose of evolution. He must formulate the instructional objectives and define them clearly in terms of students' observable behavior. Before selecting the achievement measures, the intended learning outcomes must be specified clearly. Second, a variety of evaluation techniques should be used for comprehensive evaluation. It isn't possible to evaluate all the aspects of achievement with the help of a single techniques. For the better evaluation, the techniques like objective tests, essay tests, observational techniques should be used so that a complete picture of the pupil achievement and the development can be assessed. Third, an evaluator should know the limitations of different evaluation techniques. Evaluation can be done with the help of simple observation or highly developed standardized tests, but whichever the instrument or techniques, maybe it has its own limitation. There may be measurement errors. Sampling error is a common factor in educational and psychological misarmaments. And achievement tests may not include the whole course content. Error in measurement can also be found due to students questioning on objective tests. Error is also found due to incorrect interpretations of test scores. 4. The technique of evaluation must be appropriate for the characteristics or performance to be measured. Every evaluation techniques is appropriate for some use and inappropriate for another. Therefore, while selecting and evaluation techniques, one must be well aware of the strengths and the limitations of the techniques. 5. Evolution is means to an end but not an end in itself. The evolution techniques is used to take decisions about the learner. It isn't merely gathering data about the learner because blind collection of data is wastage of both time and effort, but the evaluation is meant for some useful purpose. So my presentation is over. Thank you for your attention.